You can let us know if the mic is okay. Can everyone hear us nice and clearly? Yeah, sound is good. Right. I suppose good evening and welcome to you all. We really thank you for being here with us today. My name is Sasha Wilson. I am a friend and colleague of Peter's, and I'll be just conducting this interview today with him. So Peter and I met in public education, which is where we were both working at the time, myself at the Department of Basic Education, and Peter at that time heading up the education unit at Deloitte in Touche. And our paths crossed in 2013 when we conducted a teacher provisioning project together, some research into that, and we were both involved in that. I was a very young woman coming into government, and I think as a young woman, having grown up in this young democracy, had certain expectations of what I was going to find while working in government, i.e. incompetence and corruption. And I was incredibly suspicious of people from the public or private sector working in government, because my impression was these were people who are out to make a quick buck off of the back of government, which is kind of the impression that you get if you read our newspapers and feel the general geist of how people feel about politics in our country. And I think in that context, I was incredibly suspicious of Peter, because here was a man who was in every meeting, was constantly thinking, constantly having conversations, would change projects in the middle of them because he felt that they were going in the wrong way, or make adjustments with no cost to clients or anything. And that immediately had red flags for me. Like, what is this man's agenda? Because I had this expectation of sort of corruption. And it's only later, after years of continuing to have our paths cross over the years, when Peter shared with me that he had written his memoirs, and having then read those memoirs, that I understood why Peter dedicated every minute of his time and every resource that he could muster, whether it was via Deloitte or NGO partners, to make things happen in education. And I really then got a different understanding about some of the people that work in the public sector and for the public sector. So perhaps with that background, we can...
Right on the edge.
Yes, no, I do know. Thank you, Yuji. I appreciate that. Some health and safety checks over there, so appreciate that. So Peter, I mean, I've kind of alluded to the fact that I've known you to be an intelligent, hard-working, strategic thinker. And yet, just reading the back blurb of your book, my mind is cast to myself as a 22-year-old, how self-absorbed I was at that age. I think maybe you were just meeting me shortly after that age. I just learned how to tie my shoelaces. Yet, the Peter of 22 was behaving very differently than the Sasha of 22. And I wonder if you could give us a little bit of background about how it is that at the age of 22, you made a decision to smuggle not just yourself, but your newlywed bride over the border into Angola to train as MK soldiers as a honeymoon.
Thank you, Sasha. Maybe I should start with just giving a little bit of background, probably brief, on where I come from. So I was born in 1963. My parents rented a room in Guru. And when I was 3 weeks old, the Group Areas Act caused them Guru to be declared white. And my parents were moved to Elsies River. So as a 3 weeks old baby, my father managed to buy a plot, 200 rand. There was a chicken coop on the plot. He put a roof over. And that was the first impact apartheid had on me. Our upbringing was, I guess, discipline from our parents' side, I guess hard work, and then religion. So as Christians, we belong to the Elsies River Dutch Reformed Church. I guess my primary school upbringing was really around how to live a good life, how to live a godly ethical life. Then 1980 came, so I was a student at Bisbona High School in Athlone. I was in grade 11, standard 9, and we had the uprising of 1980. I missed 1976 because I was still in grade 7, standard 5. And I guess it's at that age when we were in the streets, soldiers around every corner, tear gas, etc. And those of you my age from that era would understand what I mean. I guess that's where Peter started to ask, we understand and see the injustice in the country. How does that link with the church services in the morning? When I go to either Sunday school or on a Sunday morning in church. So 1980, 1981, I think, was for me the turning point. I did a 4-year drafting course, 3 years in Kimberley, 1 year in Johannesburg, and that was during the tricameral elections process, if you remember, 83, 84. And that's where I think I became politically conscious during that period. And I guess it was in 85, stayed in the Eldorado Park in Johannesburg, attended rallies in Soweto. That's where Peter finally decided, 22-year-old Peter, finally decided that there are things that can be so wrong in this world that it's worthwhile that you're prepared to sacrifice your life if needs be to fight against an unjust system. So that's, I think, short journey.
So when you get to this point, you have smuggled yourself over the border. You've gotten married, sort of, I want to say, under false pretenses, because I believe it was an ultimatum. Marry me and come with me, or don't marry it, or I'm still going. But from what I know about Billy, I think if you kind of just beat her to the question, otherwise she would be asking you. I'm wondering if you could give us a sense. I know you've prepared some readings about sort of arriving in the camp as this young newlywed couple and embarking on this journey. What was that honeymoon night like in the MK camp for the first time?
Yeah, I think, if I may, so we got married on 27 December 1985. And I think 1985 was quite a difficult year in our country. The same evening we left home for Johannesburg. From there, so by the 3rd of January we were in Botswana. And then our journey was Lusaka, where the ANC's headquarters was, and from there we went to Angola. So that's over about a 4-6 week period. Maybe to answer your question, if I maybe can just read, and I need to now find that. I think there's a book in my laptop bag, Chloe, that I have it marked, if you don't mind. Sorry for not taking it out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, perfect. I don't have to look for it. So that was the route that we took. Late one morning, we were collected from the flat and taken to a central location where we met other comrades who must have been staying elsewhere in Luanda. We were all new recruits. The place where we were gathered looked like a warehouse facility. It was here that we were issued with camouflage uniforms, the sizes generally too large. While several trucks were being loaded with food and supplies, we were divided into groups and allocated to vehicles that were headed off to different MK training camps. We had no idea where we were going, and no one asked. That was the way things were done. Bibi and I were 22 years old. Until we arrived at the warehouse, I thought we were young. But as I stood there, looking at children who could not have been more than 16 or 18 years old, ready to go on the same dangerous journey, I felt old. As new recruits, we all sat in the center of large open trucks, clutching our meager belongings. All around us, on the sides of the trucks, were trained MK soldiers. hoisted and pointed their AK-47s outwards, ready to return fire should we be ambushed. And so we started a long journey, one that lasted until nightfall. From Luanda to a mountainous area with narrow, untarred roads. The entrance to the camp appeared quite suddenly. There were no fence around the grounds. The forest forming a natural boundary. The place was heavily guarded. One of the lookouts opened the compound to allow us in. We were given a meal and drank water. There were no taps at the camp, which meant you had to grab your mug and drink from an open metal container. Shortly after our meal, under the cover of darkness and trees, we were divided into groups. We were also introduced to comrades already in training. We accompanied them to be shown to our accommodation. The women slept separately in one tent, and I hugged and kissed Bibi before she left my side and joined them. I was allocated to 2 comrades. I only remember the name of one, Vincent. In the darkness, I walked between them, each carrying an AK-47 over his shoulder, and Vincent carrying a lamp to light the path ahead. My sleeping quarters for that first evening was a dugout. The roof of the dugout was just above ground level, and I followed Vincent down the few steps into the hollow. Space inside was limited, but they had already prepared a place for me to sleep. After Vincent blew out the light, it was so dark I could not see my hand in front of my eyes. Naturally, I struggled to sleep, unnerved by the darkness and disturbing rustles in the reeds. I asked Comrade Vincent about the sound, but he assured me there is nothing to worry about. Only the sound of rats that were scurrying about. No, sorry. Let me just So that was the sense of my first evening. Bibi described in the book how she experienced that evening. But I think you asked about the camp. It's a military base. Our camp's name was Pango. So this hierarchy, obviously new arrivals were right at the bottom from a rank point of view. But very formal, very structured. It's like in school. So we would have theory classes. The class is not a class, it's a couple of seats under a tree. And when we move from one class to the next class, getting lectures on theory, and then later on practical. So the subjects that we would do would be reconnaissance, firearms, explosives, but also politics. So in the political classes, introduced to the ANCs, the history of the country, etc. We did not have our real names, so once you arrive in Lusaka, we were given new names. My name was Richie, Bibi's name was Elsie, so my surname was Betty, and the same name you kept while in exile. So I guess we made good friends, Yes, we were under difficult circumstances, but youngsters, 22-year-olds, you had your pop fun as well. But I guess one of the things we've lost, not knowing who your friend or your comrade is. In most cases, we never, after liberation, had contact with any of them because we did not know where they were from in the country. We did not know their names. Yeah, just left the gap.
So perhaps talking then about your return to South Africa, your family must have had some questions about how your honeymoon was and what it was that you guys got up to. What is it that you told them? Were they aware of what you guys were doing?
Only 5 people knew that we were gone. Somebody I met involved in the church in the Sign became a friend, somebody by the name of Ike Abrams. He was involved with the South African Council of Churches at the time. I approached him when I decided to join MK. He introduced me to somebody called Curtis Nkondo. He was an educationist, I found out afterwards, and a unionist, I guess one can say. Dr. Bayes Nodir was going to assist us at some point to leave the country, so we met with him as well. And then Dr. Alan Busak in Cape Town. And on the family side, it was only my father who knew. Nobody else knew we were leaving. None of our close comrades that we were with in the UDF knew. So when we came back the same route via Zambia. Once we were done training, so we had contact with the family until we left Botswana. And we had contact with the family again when we made the first phone call from ANC officers in Lusaka on our way back. And then we still kept the story, we were in Malawi, which we haven't been to. Malawi, I think, had good relations with South Africa at the time. We kept that story with phone calls until we got home. Bought a lot of things at flea markets, etc. So when we arrived here, we looked like a couple who's been on honeymoon, traveled throughout Africa. Yeah.
So I'm reflecting on the difficulty you must have experienced, sort of living this double life, and thinking about myself as someone who really values being able to be myself fully, especially with my family, and then also kind of reflecting on how peaceful our transition was towards democracy. Wonder what your thoughts are on the price of freedom, or the cost of freedom, and whether that is a cost which is ever completed in terms of payment.
So if I miss half of the question, you remind me.
Mm-hmm.
If I think of the period from Standard 9 until end of 1984, so that's student politics where you have friends in Kimberley and then in Johannesburg, where you're part of the UDF. Your only concern would be, whether somebody would make as if he's a trusted comrade, might be working for the security police. But you would have people close to you that you can talk about activism. I made the decision to join MK alone in early 1985. And I guess from that moment I understood that I'm alone now, that anything I say can impact my life. So I guess I started to live a double life from about on my 21st birthday, which was in April. Round about from that time, even politically, I would consider what I say to somebody, even if it's a close comrade. And that was difficult. I mean, it was when we came back even worse. So, you feel you have MK written on your head. So that was a very, I think, difficult. I think it took its toll. So even after 1990 and after 1994, I still lived as if I was an MK soldier. So we haven't, I think one of the things we haven't done, often I reflect whether it was the right or the wrong thing to do. But even after 1990, we've not declared to the world that we were MK soldiers. I think in 2000 was the first time. In the year 2000 was the first time my mother and my siblings knew, because there was an incident where we ended up telling them. But I mean, the professional, in my professional world in education, nobody knew, and we just kept that, so it took its toll. I think the writing of the book, which I started in 2016, made a major difference to my mindset. Because before that, every 3 to 5 years, I would have a breakdown. that nobody knew about, not even Bibi. But yeah, I think since 2016, it's probably one of the best things I've done for myself was to get it out.
I think perhaps we'll leave the questions from my side at that, and we'll open the questions up to the audience. If there are any questions anyone would like to ask to Peter.
So what was the reasoning behind using a different name, and did that ever cause any identity crisis for the brand? And also, how long were you gone for in that first instance when nobody really knew you? Well, even you and your wife were on basically a holiday. How long was that?
So we got married 27th of December 85, 3rd of January in Botswana. Made contact with the ANC there. And there's two things that the ANC did for security reasons. Is every different place that we got to in exile, you had to sit down for a couple of days and write your story. Your story literally, this is where I was born, I attended school here, this is my political involvement, and you write that, and then somebody would interview you and ask you questions, and you go rewrite. So you might do that for a week. And then they keep that information, and then now from Botswana we go to Lusaka, and guess what? You write the story again. And somebody else interviewed you. The same happened when we got to Rwanda. And the idea then is to make sure that your stories, your history remains the same. And there's nothing that you have to remember about it. The issue around the name was if I were to be interrogated at some point, and I had to give names, all of those would be fictitious names. And anybody who was in contact with us, who had to say, yes, there was this couple there, and they called Richie and Elsie, they would not be able to know it was Bibi and Peter, and the security police would not be able to trace it back to us. No, that hasn't left a scar in terms of identity. In fact, I was surprised how quickly, unfortunately, I called my wife Lovey. But I'm telling you, within a week or two, even when we were alone, we would talk to each other as Richie and Elsie. And that was the idea. Even if we have a conversation sitting here and calling each other, it would not be Peter or Bibi, it would be Richie or Elsie.
And how long were you there for?
Sorry. So we left, sorry about that part. So we came back, I'm probably going to be out by a couple of days, right? But we left 3rd of January. There was a state of emergency declared in the country around about the 13th of June in 86. And I think the next day we were on our flights back to South Africa. A day after the state of emergency was declared. So for about 6 months, or 5.5 or 6 months, we were outside. And I'm telling you, Jan Smuts airport landing, you really think the security police will wait for you. And then from Johannesburg, driving home, there were roadblocks all over on the N1, which we took some back routes. In 87, I did go back to Lusaka alone again to receive instructions. And at that time, I think I was out of the country about 2 weeks, two or 3 weeks. Yeah.
You mentioned something about the UDF. What was your relationship with Dr. Busak?
So Dr. Busak, my father was a motor mechanic and later on a building contractor. We were in the Dutch Reformed Church in Elsie's-River. My father was an elderman in the church. And through church circles, they knew each other, and he did mechanical work on Dr. Busak's car. So let's say a church friend and partly family friend. But my link with Dr. Busak did not start through that relationship. Curtis and Kondo, who I met with in Johannesburg, unbeknown to me, also senior leader in the UDF structures. He knew Dr. Busak. And once again, in my interview with him as to who you are, background, whatever, Dr. Busak's name came up, so we knew that there was a relationship. And I think it was Curtis that I said at some point, I have this girlfriend that I might want to ask to go with me. It was probably the best advice I got during that period was where Curtis asked, why don't you marry her? It will be easy for you in exile if you're married. I was 22 years old, stupid youngster, and I thought never. But I did ask her to marry me. And most probably, if I look at what happened to other comrades who left as girlfriend and boyfriend, was probably one of the best pieces of advice I got from Curtis was to get married to my wife, which meant we weren't separated. We traveled together, went to the same camp. And I'm writing about a very sad incident where a couple were separated into different camps. And both their lives ended very, very sadly. It was Curtis who gave me a letter then to give to Dr. Busak. And it was Dr. Busak who advised me that I cannot leave without telling my father, which also was very good advice. He knew my father well enough to say to me, Peter, if you don't tell him, he's gonna continue looking for you. And that, I think, would have been quite a security risk for us. If we had to start looking for us and asking everybody. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I just wanted to find out about the coaching process. Because, besides the literal just going to other coaching processes for the employees. I suppose anyone could infiltrate.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess the vetting process for me was, so I came from a church service one evening from a bidyear. I came to pick me up. The dean might be conducted the service. And on our way back, with him dropping me off, I said, listen, I'm thinking of joining MK. Do you know somebody in the ANC? Now, when I asked that question, I was not confused at that point that if Ike is an enemy agent, I'm gone. And when Ike stayed quiet for a few moments, I was worried. And his response was purely, listen, Peter, I don't know anybody, but I'll see what I can do. And I asked, while writing the book, I asked Ike, that night, what went through your mind? He said to me, listen, I just knew you for a few months. I was worried about my family. You're an enemy agent. So I first checked you out, and I don't know how he did it. He introduced me to Curtis and Kondo, and Curtis had a number of interviews with me in the back room. It's almost the same kind of ANC, who are you, background, etc., etc. I'm not sure whether he checked me out in other ways. And then once he arranged for me to meet 3 elderly gentlemen at his house. When I got there, he wasn't there. And his wife, Auntie Rose, introduced me to them, and then they once again asked me a couple of questions, interview process. And I think that was the final interview, if you were to say so. But yeah.
The questions? If there's nothing else, Eugene, would you like to close us off?
Thanks very much. There's a section inside this bookshop called Border War.
Excuse me, I told you.
Yeah.
No, we have a lot of questions.
We still have another one.
Yeah, we'll read a little bit this time, but we'll just ask him that with all the certificates that you know, how do you think I mean, maybe with other countries, maybe as a global.
I guess, if I maybe, before I answer that question, go back to, I think if you ask maybe what saddens me is that I can forgive the young people maybe to some extent, but I think people even my age or a few years younger than me maybe don't have the understanding of what sacrifices were needed for us to be free. I think I'm fortunate to have life experiences that I almost cannot forget that sacrifice. So it's something as simple as we arrived in Zambia in a suburb called Kabwata, where there's think of us like a semi-detached kind of township house where there's 2 units, and we stayed there with, I don't know, 10 or 20 comrades. And they are comrades from the 1976 era with children when they left. And all they wanted to know is, what's South Africa like? Tell me about home. Then you understand what those youngsters went through. That's 10 years later when we met them. Our camp had a mutiny about 23 months before we arrived, where soldiers were killed. We saw the graves. The mutineers were not buried with the others. And as I stood there one morning, just shortly after we arrived, when they told us what happened, I mean, as a young 22-year-old, I thought, okay, fine, so I wonder whether this is the truth. The second question in my mind were, where did we bury the mutineers? When we came back and nobody knew our background, we attended the funeral of Ashley Cripp. We attended the memorial service of Anton Franz. And those were young people like us who died. I think Anton died a few months before the ANC was unbanned. So I guess what we forget is that I don't want to say we forgot about it, but I think there's a hell of a price that people paid, ordinary people. I'm not talking senior ANC, I'm talking about ordinary young people who fought for us, whether it was somebody who went through what we went through, or somebody who got detained and interrogated because they distributed pamphlets. Because that's what happened in our country. You distribute pamphlets, they catch you, they interrogate you, they send you to prison. And maybe I feel sometimes that we forget about what was needed for us to have this freedom, which now, we think is easy.